The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the cramped break room of Hartwell Community Center, casting harsh shadows across the scratched formica table where Sarah Martinez sat alone with her lunch. Her staff badge hung from a retractable cord, clipped to her belt, swaying gently as she unwrapped the sandwich she'd packed that morning. The badge reads Sarah Martinez, Security Coordinator, in bold black letters, but it was the smaller item tucked behind it that drew unwanted attention from her coworkers. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Her military identification card, worn at the edges from years of use, peeked out from behind her civilian credentials. The laminated surface had developed fine scratches. That caught the light, and the photo showed a younger version of herself in dress uniform, her dark hair pulled back in regulation style, her expression serious and professional. She had carried that card through 3 deployments, countless training exercises, and 8 years of active duty service that had shaped every aspect of who she had become. The community center served a rough neighborhood on the east side of Detroit, providing after-school programs for local kids and evening classes for adults trying to improve their job prospects. Sarah had been working there for 6 months, ever since she'd moved back to Michigan after her military discharge. The pay wasn't much, but the work felt meaningful in a way that reminded her of the service she'd left behind. The center's director, Margaret Chun, had hired Sarah specifically for her security background and leadership experience. The facility had been dealing with increased vandalism and occasional threats from local gang members, who saw the center as competition for the teenagers they were trying to recruit. Sarah's job was to maintain a safe environment while building relationships with the community members who used the facility's services. Her approach was methodical and professional, drawing on training that had taught her to assess situations quickly and respond with appropriate force levels. She documented every incident, maintained detailed logs of suspicious activities, and worked closely with local police to address ongoing security concerns. The teenagers who attended the after-school programs had initially been wary of her authority, but they'd gradually begun to respect her firm but fair approach to maintaining order. However, her coworkers remained skeptical of her background and qualifications. The break room conversations often turned to military service, with several staff members sharing stories about family members who had served in various conflicts. When Sarah contributed to these discussions, mentioning her own experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq, the responses were polite but clearly doubtful. Tom Bradley, the center's maintenance supervisor, had been the most vocal in his skepticism. He was a large man in his 50s who had worked at the facility for over a decade, establishing himself as an unofficial leader among the support staff. During lunch breaks, he would lean back in his chair and share stories about his brother-in-law who had served in the Marines, always emphasizing the physical and mental toughness required for military service. "My brother-in-law came back from Iraq completely different," Tom would say, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed real military trauma. "You can tell when someone's been through combat. There's something in their eyes, you know. They carry themselves differently. They don't talk about it much, but you can see it." When Sarah mentioned her own deployment experiences, Tom's expression would shift to something between amusement and condescension. "Yeah, well, everyone's got their stories," he would say, his tone suggesting that he didn't consider her claims particularly credible. "Military's got all kinds of support roles these days. Not everyone who deploys actually sees combat." The dismissal was casual but persistent, delivered with the kind of practiced skepticism that made it difficult to challenge directly. Sarah had learned to simply nod and redirect the conversation to work-related topics, but the constant questioning of her background had begun to wear on her professionally and personally. Linda Rodriguez, who managed the center's administrative operations, had developed her own theory about Sarah's military identification. During a staff meeting focused on security protocols, Linda had glanced at Sarah's ID card and made a comment that had stayed with Sarah for weeks afterward. "You know, you can buy those fake military IDs online now," Linda had said, speaking to Margaret but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I saw a news report about it last month. People use them to get military discounts at restaurants and stores. Some of them look pretty authentic." The comment had been followed by an uncomfortable silence, with several staff members glancing at Sarah's ID card with newfound suspicion. Margaret had quickly moved the meeting forward, but the seed of doubt had been planted in a way that would influence future interactions. Sarah's attempts to demonstrate her military knowledge and experience were met with continued skepticism. When she recommended security improvements based on force protection principles she'd learned during her service, Tom dismissed her suggestions as something she'd probably read online. When she offered to train other staff members in basic security awareness, Linda suggested that they should probably get someone with real credentials to handle that kind of training. The pattern of dismissal had become so routine that Sarah had stopped trying to defend her background. She focused instead on doing her job with the same professionalism and attention to detail that had earned her commendations during her military service. Her incident reports were thorough and accurate. Her interactions with troubled teenagers were consistently effective, and her coordination with local law enforcement had helped reduce security problems at the facility. But the quiet competence that had served her well in the military seemed to have little impact on her coworkers' perceptions. They saw her as a young woman who had fabricated a military background to land a security job, someone who carried a fake ID to support her fictional narrative about deployments and combat experience. The situation had reached a point where Sarah dreaded lunch breaks and staff meetings, knowing that any mention of her military service would be met with skeptical glances and dismissive comments. She had begun eating alone, avoiding conversations that might lead to questions about her background, and limiting her professional interactions to the bare minimum required for effective job performance. Despite the ongoing skepticism from her coworkers, Sarah maintained her commitment to the community center's mission. She arrived early each morning, stayed late when necessary, and treated every security challenge with the same systematic approach she had applied to much more dangerous situations during her deployments. The teenagers in the after-school programs had begun to trust her judgment, and several parents had specifically thanked her for creating a safer environment for their children. Margaret Chun, the center's director, had noticed the tension between Sarah and other staff members, but had chosen not to address it directly. She valued Sarah's work performance and had seen measurable improvements in the facility's security situation since her hiring. However, she also understood the importance of maintaining staff cohesion and had avoided taking sides in what she perceived as a personality conflict rather than a more serious professional issue. The dismissive attitudes had begun to affect Sarah's confidence in ways that surprised her. During her military service, she had faced much more serious challenges and had never doubted her ability to handle difficult situations. But the constant questioning of her identity and credentials had created a psychological burden that felt heavier than the physical dangers she had faced in combat zones. She had begun to question whether leaving the military had been the right decision, whether she belonged in civilian employment, and whether her skills and experience had any value outside the structured environment of military service. The doubt was corrosive, eating away at the self-assurance that had been built through years of successful performance under extreme pressure. Yet Sarah continued to carry her military ID with the same pride and respect she had always shown for the uniform and the service it represented. The card was more than just identification. It was a symbol of sacrifices made, challenges overcome, and a commitment to something larger than herself. No amount of skepticism from coworkers could diminish the reality of what that card represented in her life. The break room remained quiet except for the humming of fluorescent lights and the distant sounds of children's voices from the after-school program. Sarah finished her sandwich, tucked her military ID back behind her staff badge, and prepared to return to work. She had learned to find satisfaction in the job itself rather than in the recognition or respect of her colleagues. But she had no idea that within 72 hours, everything would change in a way that would validate not just her military service, but her value as a professional and as a person who had dedicated her life to protecting others. The after-school program buzzed with its usual controlled chaos, as dozens of children between the ages of 8 and 16 filled the community centers. Main hall. Sarah stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand, conducting her routine security sweep of the facility. Her eyes moved systematically across the room, noting exit routes, checking for unfamiliar faces, and observing the general mood and energy level of the group. She had developed this pattern during her first week at the center, adapting military situational awareness techniques to a civilian environment. Every afternoon at 3:30, she would position herself where she could observe both the main entrance and the hallway leading to the back exit, ensuring that she could respond quickly to any disturbance while maintaining a non-threatening presence that wouldn't alarm the children or their parents. The teenagers clustered near the basketball court had initially viewed her with suspicion, testing her authority through small acts of defiance and carefully watching her reactions. Sarah had handled these challenges with the same patience and consistency she had used when training new soldiers, establishing clear boundaries while showing respect for their intelligence and potential. Marcus Williams, a 15-year-old who had been involved in several minor altercations before Sarah's arrival, approached her with the casual swagger that masked his growing respect for her authority. "Miss Sarah, you gonna watch us play today?" he asked, bouncing a basketball against his hip with practiced ease. "Same as always, Marcus," Sarah replied, her tone friendly but professional. "I'm here to make sure everyone stays safe and has a good time. You planning to keep that temper in check during the game?" Marcus grinned, remembering the previous week when Sarah had diffused a heated argument between him and another player using techniques that had surprised everyone with their effectiveness. She hadn't raised her voice or made threats, but had somehow managed to redirect the conflict into a productive conversation about teamwork and respect. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said, his mock-serious tone carrying genuine affection. "You taught me that thing about counting to 10 before I say something stupid, remember?" Sarah nodded, making a note on her clipboard about the positive interaction. These small victories with the teenagers meant more to her than any recognition she might receive from her adult colleagues. The kids didn't care about her military background or question her credentials. They judged her based on her actions, her fairness, and her ability to maintain order without becoming a tyrant. At the far end of the hall, Tom Bradley was setting up tables for the evening adult education classes. He glanced toward Sarah with his usual expression of mild skepticism, then turned to speak with Janet Morrison, one of the volunteer tutors who helped with the literacy program. "Still carrying around that military ID like it's some kind of badge of honor," Tom said, his voice pitched low but not quite quiet enough to avoid Sarah's attention. "I've been thinking about what Linda said about those fake IDs. You can get them made pretty cheap these days." Janet, a retired teacher in her 60s who had been volunteering at the center for 3 years, looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I don't know, Tom. Sarah seems to know what she's talking about when it comes to security. The problems we were having with those gang members pretty much stopped after she started working here." Tom shrugged, his expression suggesting that he attributed the improved security situation to coincidence rather than Sarah's professional competence. There could be lots of reasons for that. Maybe they just got bored and moved on to bother someone else. Besides, reading about security online isn't the same as actually having military training. The conversation continued in whispers and meaningful glances, with several other staff members joining the discussion as they prepared for the evening activities. Sarah continued her security rounds, maintaining her professional demeanor while internally processing the ongoing skepticism about her background and qualifications. Near the center's main office, she encountered Margaret Chun reviewing enrollment forms for the new computer skills class that would begin the following week. Margaret looked up from her paperwork with the distracted expression of someone managing multiple priorities simultaneously. "Sarah, I wanted to talk to you about the security assessment you submitted last month," Margaret said, her tone businesslike but not unfriendly. "The recommendations about improving our emergency communication procedures and updating our lockdown protocols. I've been thinking about implementing some of those changes." Sarah felt a brief moment of professional satisfaction. The security assessment had been comprehensive, drawing on her experience with force protection planning and emergency response procedures. She had spent several evenings researching best practices for civilian facilities, adapting military security principles to the community center's specific needs and limitations. "I'm glad you found the recommendations useful," Sarah replied. "The communication improvements would be relatively inexpensive to implement, and they could make a significant difference if we ever face a serious emergency situation." Margaret nodded, but her expression suggested some uncertainty about moving forward with the proposed changes. "The thing is, some of the board members have been asking questions about your qualifications for making these kinds of recommendations. They want to know more about your background and training." The request was delivered diplomatically, but Sarah understood the underlying message. Her coworkers' skepticism about her military service had reached the center's board of directors, creating doubt about her professional competence and the value of her security recommendations. "I'd be happy to provide additional documentation about my training and experience," Sarah said, maintaining her professional composure despite the frustration building inside her. "My military records include detailed information about the security courses I completed and the responsibilities I held during my deployments." Margaret's expression softened slightly, suggesting that she personally didn't doubt Sarah's qualifications, but was feeling pressure from other sources. "I know this is awkward, but you understand how these things work. When we're dealing with children's safety, everyone wants to be extra careful about credentials and qualifications." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the basketball court, where Marcus Williams was arguing with another teenager about a disputed foul call. Sarah excused herself from the discussion with Margaret and moved quickly toward the developing conflict, her training taking over as she assessed the situation and formulated a response strategy. The argument had attracted attention from other teenagers, and Sarah could see the familiar signs of a minor disagreement escalating into something more serious. Both boys were posturing for their friends, their voices getting louder and their body language becoming more aggressive. This was exactly the kind of situation that had led to several incidents before Sarah's arrival at the center. She approached the conflict with calm authority, positioning herself between the two boys without appearing to take sides. "Marcus, Tyler, what's the problem here?" she asked, her voice carrying just enough command presence to capture their attention without escalating the tension. "He's cheating," Tyler accused, pointing at Marcus with obvious frustration. "That wasn't a foul, and he knows it. He's been doing it all afternoon." Marcus bristled at the accusation, his hands clenching into fists as he prepared to defend his reputation. "I wasn't cheating. You just can't handle losing, so you're making up excuses." Sarah had seen this exact dynamic play out countless times in different contexts. Two people with legitimate grievances, both feeling disrespected, both ready to escalate the conflict rather than lose face in front of their peers. The key was to redirect their energy toward problem solving rather than blame assignment. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," Sarah said, her tone suggesting that she had already decided on a solution that would satisfy both parties. "We're going to replay the last possession, but this time I'm going to referee. That way everyone gets a fair shot, and we can settle this without anyone feeling cheated." The solution was simple but effective. allowing both boys to save face while establishing clear rules for continued play. Sarah's approach demonstrated the kind of practical leadership that had earned her respect among the teenagers, even as her adult colleagues continued to question her qualifications and background. As the basketball game resumed under her supervision, Sarah noticed Tom Bradley watching from across the hall with his usual skeptical expression. He turned to speak with Linda Rodriguez, who had arrived to set up for the evening's computer class, and their conversation was accompanied by glances in Sarah's direction and subtle headshakes that suggested continued doubt about her abilities. The pattern had become familiar and predictable. Sarah would handle a situation with professional competence, demonstrating skills that clearly came from extensive training and experience, but her coworkers would find ways to minimize or dismiss her performance. They seemed determined to maintain their narrative about her fake military credentials, regardless of evidence to the contrary. Linda Rodriguez approached Sarah as the basketball game continued, her expression carrying the artificial friendliness that often preceded uncomfortable conversations. "You're really good with the kids," Linda said, her tone suggesting that this was somehow surprising or noteworthy. "Thank you," Sarah replied, unsure where the conversation was heading, but maintaining her professional demeanor. "It's interesting," Linda continued, "how some people have natural instincts for handling conflict, even without formal training. You must have learned a lot about dealing with people in your previous jobs." The comment was carefully phrased to avoid directly challenging Sarah's military background, while simultaneously suggesting that her skills came from civilian experience rather than military training. It was the kind of subtle dismissal that made direct confrontation impossible while still undermining her credibility. Sarah recognized the tactic and chose not to engage with it directly. "Experience helps," she said simply, focusing her attention on the teenagers who were finishing their game and preparing to transition to homework time. The evening progressed with its usual routine of supervised activities, tutoring sessions, and informal mentoring conversations. Sarah moved through the facility with quiet efficiency, maintaining security while building relationships with the community members who used the center's services. Her approach was professional and effective, but it continued to be met with skepticism from colleagues, who seemed unable to accept that her competence might be based on legitimate military training and experience. As the center prepared to close for the evening, Sarah completed her final security sweep and began documenting the day's activities in her incident log. The report would be brief and routine, noting the successful resolution of the basketball dispute and the continued positive engagement with the after-school participants. But she had no way of knowing that tomorrow would bring a situation that would test every aspect of her training and experience, while simultaneously providing the kind of dramatic validation that would finally silence the skeptics who had spent months questioning her background and qualifications. The morning air carried an unusual tension as Sarah arrived at the community center 45 minutes before her scheduled shift. She had developed the habit of arriving early to review overnight security reports and prepare for the day's activities, but today felt different in ways she couldn't immediately identify. The parking lot was emptier than usual, and the building seemed to hold a stillness that made her hyper-aware of every sound. She used her key card to enter through the staff entrance, noting automatically that the security system showed no overnight incidents. The hallways were dimly lit by emergency lighting, and her footsteps echoed against the polished floors as she made her way to the main office. The familiar routine of checking systems and reviewing schedules usually provided a sense of order and control, but this morning she found herself scanning the environment with heightened awareness. The overnight security report contained a single entry that caught her attention. At approximately 2:30 a.m., a patrol officer had responded to a motion sensor activation near the center's rear entrance. The officer had found no signs of intrusion or vandalism, but had noted the presence of several individuals who appeared to be conducting surveillance of the building from across the street. The report classified the incident as suspicious activity and recommended increased monitoring of the facility. Sarah frowned as she read the details. The community center had experienced various security challenges over the months, but organized surveillance suggested a level of planning and intent that was concerning. She made a mental note to review the security camera footage from the overnight period and coordinate with local police about increasing patrol frequency in the area. Margaret Chun arrived 30 minutes later, looking harried and distracted as she juggled her coffee cup, briefcase, and several folders that threatened to spill their contents across the floor. "Sarah, thank goodness you're here early," Margaret said, her voice carrying a note of relief. "I just got a call from the district supervisor. We're having some kind of inspection today, though they weren't very specific about what they're looking for." The news was unexpected and potentially problematic. Unscheduled inspections usually meant that someone had filed a complaint or raised concerns about the facility's operations. Sarah's mind immediately went to the ongoing skepticism from her coworkers about her qualifications and the security recommendations she had submitted to the board. "Do you know what agency is conducting the inspection?" Sarah asked, her training automatically shifting into assessment mode. Different agencies had different priorities and procedures, and understanding the scope of the inspection would help her prepare appropriate documentation and responses. Margaret shook her head, setting down her coffee with slightly shaking hands. "They just said federal investigators would be here sometime this afternoon. They asked specifically about our security procedures and staff qualifications. I have a feeling this might be related to the concern some board members raised about your recommendations." The implication was clear without being directly stated. Sarah's military background and security expertise were about to be scrutinized by federal investigators, and the outcome could determine not just her employment status, but her professional reputation in the community. The skepticism from her coworkers had apparently escalated to the point where external validation was required. "I'll make sure all my documentation is current and accessible," Sarah said, maintaining her professional composure despite the anxiety building in her chest. "My military records, training certifications, and security assessments are all properly filed and ready for review." Margaret nodded, but her expression suggested she was dealing with pressures and concerns beyond what she was sharing. "I know this is uncomfortable, Sarah, but you understand why we have to be careful. When federal investigators start asking questions about our operations, everyone gets nervous." The morning progressed with an undercurrent of tension that affected the entire staff. Word of the upcoming inspection had spread quickly, and Sarah noticed that her coworkers were treating her with a mixture of nervous anticipation and barely concealed satisfaction. Tom Bradley made several comments about finally getting to the bottom of things, while Linda Rodriguez seemed particularly interested in observing Sarah's reactions to the developing situation. During the lunch break, Sarah found herself alone in the break room again, but this time the isolation felt more pointed and deliberate. Her coworkers had clustered around a table at the opposite end of the room, their conversation punctuated by glances in her direction and lowered voices that suggested she was the primary topic of discussion. "I heard the investigators specifically asked about fake military credentials," Tom said, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure Sarah could hear him. "Apparently, it's becoming a real problem in security jobs. People buy fake IDs online and use them to get positions they're not qualified for." Linda nodded enthusiastically, adding her own speculation to the conversation. "It makes sense when you think about it. Sarah's pretty young to have all the experience she claims, and she's never really talked about specific units or commanders, just general stories about deployments." The analysis was delivered with the confidence of amateur investigators who had convinced themselves they were uncovering a significant deception. Sarah continued eating her lunch, maintaining her professional demeanor while internally processing the reality that her Coworkers had essentially built a case against her, based on their collective skepticism and assumptions. Janet Morrison, the volunteer tutor who had previously defended Sarah, looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Sarah's always seemed professional to me, and she's definitely made improvements to the security situation here." Tom dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand. "Anyone can read about security procedures online. The question is whether she actually has the training and experience to back up her recommendations. That's what these investigators are going to find out." The speculation continued throughout the lunch break, with various staff members contributing their own theories about Sarah's background and motivations. The consensus seemed to be that she was a well-intentioned, but ultimately fraudulent employee who had deceived them about her qualifications in order to secure a position she wasn't qualified to hold. Sarah finished her lunch and returned to her afternoon duties, focusing on the after-school program preparation while maintaining awareness of the building's security status. The surveillance incident from the previous night continued to concern her, and she made several additional checks of the exterior cameras and perimeter security. At approximately 2 o'clock, she noticed an unusual amount of activity in the parking lot. Several unmarked sedans had arrived and parked in positions that suggested professional surveillance techniques. The vehicles were positioned to provide optimal observation of the building's entrances, while maintaining tactical advantages for rapid response or evacuation. Through the main office window, Sarah could see individuals in business attire conducting what appeared to be a preliminary assessment of the facility's layout and security features. Their movements and positioning suggested law enforcement or intelligence backgrounds, and their attention to detail indicated this was more than a routine inspection. Margaret Chun appeared beside her, looking increasingly nervous as she observed the developing situation. "They're here," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The federal investigators. They want to speak with you first, before they interview other staff members." Sarah nodded, her military training automatically engaging as she prepared for what could be a career-defining interview. She had faced much more dangerous situations during her deployments, but this felt different because it involved her identity and professional integrity rather than physical survival. "I'll be in the conference room," Sarah said, straightening her shoulders and checking to ensure her military ID was properly positioned behind her staff badge. "I assume they'll want to review my documentation and credentials." Margaret's expression was sympathetic but helpless. "Sarah, I want you to know that personally, I've never doubted your qualifications. But with all the questions that have been raised and now federal investigators asking about security procedures." The sentence trailed off, but Sarah understood the implications. Regardless of Margaret's personal opinion, the center's leadership was prepared to distance themselves from her if the investigation revealed problems with her background or qualifications. As Sarah walked toward the conference room, she passed several co-workers who watched her progress with expressions ranging from curiosity to satisfaction. Tom Bradley made a comment to Linda Rodriguez about finally getting some answers, while other staff members whispered among themselves about the dramatic turn of events. The conference room had been prepared for the interview, with chairs arranged to facilitate formal questioning and a table positioned to hold documents and recording equipment. Sarah entered with her chin held high and her military bearing evident in every step, carrying herself with the dignity and professionalism that had been instilled through years of service. She had no way of knowing that the next few hours would not only vindicate her military service and professional qualifications, but would reveal information that would fundamentally change how everyone at the community center understood both her background and the current security situation they were facing. The federal investigators were about to learn that Sarah Martinez was not someone with questionable credentials trying to deceive her way into a security position. She was someone whose military service had been so classified and significant that her mere presence at the community center had triggered a high-level security review that would soon bring consequences none of them had anticipated. The conference room felt smaller than usual as Sarah entered to find 3 individuals in dark suits waiting for her. They had arranged themselves around the table with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to conducting high-stakes interviews. Woman at the head of the table appeared to be in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and an air of quiet authority that immediately commanded attention. The 2 men flanking her were younger, probably in their 30s, and both carried themselves with the alert posture of active field agents. "Ms. Martinez," the woman said, rising from her chair with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Agent Rebecca Foster from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. These are my colleagues, Agent Davis and Agent Thompson. We appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today." Sarah remained standing until invited to sit, her military training automatically engaging as she assessed the situation. The agent's positioning, body language, and formal introduction suggested this was more than a routine background check. The level of federal interest in her employment at a community center seemed disproportionate unless there were factors she wasn't aware of. "Of course," Sarah replied, settling into the chair across from Agent Foster. "I understand there are questions about my qualifications and background. I have all my military documentation available for review." Agent Foster opened a thick folder that had been placed on the table in front of her. "Actually, Ms. Martinez, we're not here to question your military service. We're here because your presence at this facility has raised some interesting flags in our security systems." The statement was unexpected and immediately shifted Sarah's understanding of the situation. This wasn't about her coworkers' skepticism or the board's concerns about her recommendations. The federal investigators were here because of something related to her military background, not despite it. Agent Davis leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "Your military service record includes some classifications that trigger automatic monitoring when you're employed in certain types of civilian positions. Community centers, schools, government buildings, places where security procedures might be relevant to national security interests." Sarah felt a chill of recognition as the implications became clear. During her final year of active duty, she had been assigned to a special intelligence unit that dealt with classified information and sensitive security operations. The clearance level required for that assignment came with lifetime monitoring requirements that she had signed agreements acknowledging but had never expected to encounter in civilian employment. "I wasn't aware that my current position would trigger that level of scrutiny," Sarah said, choosing her words carefully. "My role here is strictly focused on facility security and community safety." Agent Foster nodded, consulting her notes before continuing. "We understand that, and we're not questioning your intentions or your performance. However, your security clearance history and specialized training make you a person of interest when unusual activities occur in your vicinity." The mention of unusual activities connected immediately to Sarah's growing concerns about the surveillance incident and the general tension she had been sensing around the facility. Her military training had taught her to trust her instincts about potential threats, and those instincts had been increasingly active over the past several days. "What kind of unusual activities?" Sarah asked, her voice taking on the professional tone she had used during intelligence briefings. Agent Thompson opened his own folder and spread several photographs across the table. The images showed the community center from various angles, with particular focus on the parking lot and surrounding streets. Some of the photos appeared to have been taken during nighttime hours, and several showed individuals conducting what appeared to be surveillance activities. "Over the past 2 weeks, we've documented increased surveillance of this facility by individuals with connections to organized crime networks," Agent Thompson explained. "Initially, we assumed it was related to the center's work with at-risk youth, possibly gang-related intimidation tactics." Sarah studied the photographs, her trained eye immediately identifying the tactical positioning and equipment visible in the images. The surveillance was sophisticated and well organized, suggesting resources and planning beyond typical street-level criminal activity. However, Agent Foster continued, when we cross-referenced the surveillance activity with personnel records. For the facility, your name and background triggered additional security protocols. Someone with your clearance level and specialized training doesn't attract this kind of attention by coincidence. The implication was disturbing, but not entirely surprising. Sarah's military service had involved work with intelligence operations that had made her aware of various criminal and terrorist networks. The possibility that her presence at the community center had somehow attracted unwanted attention was concerning, but not unprecedented. Are you suggesting that my employment here has put the facility and its users at risk? Sarah asked, her mind already working through the security implications and potential response strategies. Agent Davis shook his head quickly. Not exactly. We believe the surveillance may be related to something you encountered during your military service, but we need to understand the full scope of the situation before we can assess the risk level. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the conference room door. Margaret Chun entered hesitantly, her expression showing the strain of managing a facility under federal investigation. I'm sorry to interrupt, Margaret said, but there's been a development. Several staff members have reported seeing unfamiliar individuals in the parking lot, and one of our volunteers thinks she recognized someone from the neighborhood who's been involved in drug-related activities. Agent Foster and her colleagues exchanged glances that suggested this information was significant and potentially expected. Sarah felt her military training fully engaged as she processed the developing situation and its potential implications for the safety of the children and adults who used the facility. Mrs. Chun, Agent Foster said, we're going to need to speak with your entire staff, but first we need to complete our conversation with Ms. Martinez. Would it be possible to keep everyone in the building until we've had a chance to assess the security situation? Margaret nodded nervously, clearly out of her depth in dealing with federal investigators and potential security threats. Of course. Should I be concerned about the safety of our after-school program participants? Agent Thompson answered before Agent Foster could respond. We don't believe there's an immediate threat to the children, but we want to take precautions until we understand what we're dealing with. After Margaret left the room, Agent Foster turned her attention back to Sarah, with an expression that suggested the conversation was about to become more serious and specific. Ms. Martinez, during your final deployment, you were involved in an operation that resulted in the disruption of a major arms trafficking network. Several high-value targets were captured, and significant financial assets were seized. Do you remember that operation? Sarah's memory immediately went to a series of missions conducted during her last 6 months of active duty. The operations had been classified at the highest levels, involving coordination between multiple agencies and resulting in arrests that had been kept out of public media coverage. Yes, Sarah said simply, understanding that the agents already knew the details and were testing her willingness to discuss classified information appropriately. 3 of the individuals arrested in that operation were recently released from federal prison, Agent Davis continued. Their release dates coincided with the beginning of surveillance activities around this facility. We believe they may be seeking revenge against personnel who were involved in their capture and prosecution. The information sent a chill through Sarah's chest as she realized the full implications of the situation. Her employment at the community center hadn't just triggered routine security monitoring, it had potentially exposed dozens of innocent people to danger from criminals seeking revenge for military operations conducted years earlier. What kind of revenge are we talking about? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the growing concern she felt for the safety of her coworkers and the community members who used the facility. Agent, Foster's expression was grim as she answered. These individuals have connections to organized crime networks that specialize in intimidation and violence. They've been known to target not just the primary individuals they're seeking revenge against, but also the communities and institutions those individuals are connected to. The revelation explained the sophisticated surveillance tactics and the level of planning that had been evident in the overnight security reports. This wasn't random criminal activity or gang-related intimidation. It was a targeted operation by individuals with resources, connections, and a specific agenda for revenge. The good news, Agent Thompson added, is that your military training and security expertise may be exactly what this facility needs to protect itself. The bad news is that your coworkers and supervisors have been questioning your qualifications at exactly the moment when those qualifications are most needed. Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and concern as she processed the information. Her military background and security recommendations were about to be proven not just legitimate, but essential for protecting the community center and everyone associated with it. The federal investigators were about to learn that Sarah Martinez was not someone with questionable credentials, but someone whose specialized training and experience would be crucial for handling the security threats that her presence had inadvertently brought to the facility. The weight of the revelation settled heavily in the conference room as Sarah processed the full implications of what the federal agents had told her. The surveillance activities, the increased tension she had been sensing, and even the skepticism from her coworkers had suddenly taken on new meaning. She wasn't just dealing with workplace dynamics or credential verification. She was potentially the focal point of a revenge operation that could endanger everyone at the community center. I need to understand the timeline, Sarah said, her voice taking on the analytical tone she had used during military briefings. When exactly were these individuals released, and how long have they been conducting surveillance of the facility? Agent Foster consulted her notes, appreciating Sarah's direct approach to the situation. Marcus Volkov was released from federal custody 6 weeks ago. His associates, brothers named Dmitry and Pavel Kozlov, were released 3 weeks later. The surveillance activities began approximately 2 weeks after all three were back on the streets. The names meant nothing to Sarah initially, but as Agent Davis provided additional details about their backgrounds and criminal activities, fragments of memory began to surface. The arms trafficking operation that had led to their capture had been complex and multinational, involving weapons shipments that were destined for various criminal organizations across the eastern United States. Volkov was the financial coordinator for the operation, Agent Thompson explained, spreading additional photographs across the table. He managed the money transfers and maintained relationships with buyers throughout the region. The Kozlov brothers handled logistics and enforcement. All three of them lost significant personal assets when the operation was shut down. Sarah studied the photographs, which showed the three men in various settings, both during their criminal activities and more recently following their release from prison. They appeared to be in their 30s and 40s, with the kind of hard-edged appearance that suggested extensive involvement in violent criminal enterprises. The intelligence we gathered during the original operation indicated that these individuals have long memories and extensive resources for pursuing revenge. Agent Foster continued. They've been known to target not just the primary people they blame for their arrests, but also family members, friends, and professional associates. The implication was clear and disturbing. By working at the community center, Sarah had potentially put dozens of innocent people at risk simply by being associated with the facility. The children in the after-school program, the adult students in the evening classes, her co-workers who had been questioning her credentials, all of them could become targets in a revenge operation designed to cause maximum pain and disruption to her life. What's their typical methodology? Sarah asked, her military training automatically shifting into threat assessment mode. Are we talking about direct confrontation, intimidation tactics, or something more sophisticated? Agent Davis answered with the grim tone of someone who had studied these individuals' criminal history extensively. They prefer psychological warfare initially. Surveillance, property damage, threats to people in your professional and personal network. The goal is to isolate their target and create maximum stress before they move to more direct action. The description matched several incidents that Sarah had noticed over the past few weeks but had attributed to routine urban crime or random vandalism. A broken window in the community center's side entrance that had been discovered one morning. Graffiti that had appeared overnight on the building's exterior wall. Several reports from community members about unfamiliar individuals, asking questions about the center's staff and operations. I think they've already begun the psychological warfare phase, Sarah said, connecting the dots between recent incidents and a larger pattern of threatening behavior. There have been several minor security breaches and suspicious activities that I documented but didn't recognize as coordinated efforts. Agent Foster leaned forward with increased interest. Tell us about those incidents. Any detail could be important for understanding their operational timeline and planning. Sarah accessed her mental files of the incident reports and security observations, providing a chronological summary of unusual activities that had occurred over the past month. The broken window had been discovered on a Monday morning, with no obvious signs of attempted entry or theft. The graffiti had appeared the following week, featuring symbols and text that had seemed random but might have been coded messages or territorial markings. Most concerning, Sarah continued, was a report from one of our regular community members about strangers, asking detailed questions about staff schedules and security procedures. The individual who reported it thought they were potential donors or volunteers, but the questions were too specific and focused for that explanation to make sense. Agent Thompson took detailed notes as Sarah described each incident, occasionally asking for clarification about timing, locations, and potential witnesses. The pattern that emerged was consistent with sophisticated surveillance and intelligence gathering operations designed to identify vulnerabilities and opportunities for more direct action. The good news, Agent Foster said, is that their methodology suggests they're still in the reconnaissance phase. They're gathering information and testing your defenses before committing to any direct confrontation. That gives us time to develop countermeasures and protective strategies. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and continued concern. The immediate threat might not be as urgent as she had initially feared, but the long-term implications were still serious. These individuals had demonstrated patience and persistence in their criminal activities, and their release from federal prison had likely only increased their motivation for revenge. What kind of countermeasures are we talking about? Sarah asked. I assume you're not suggesting we evacuate the facility or shut down the programs that serve this community. Agent Davis smiled slightly at her question, recognizing the military mindset that prioritized mission accomplishment even in the face of personal risk. Actually, we're hoping to use your security expertise to develop a comprehensive protection plan that allows the center to continue operating while minimizing exposure to potential threats. The proposal was both flattering and daunting. Sarah's military training had prepared her for personal security challenges, but protecting a civilian facility with dozens of regular users and limited resources would require adapting her skills to a completely different operational environment. I'll need to review the facility's current security measures and identify vulnerabilities, Sarah said, her mind already working through the systematic approach she would need to take. I'll also need to coordinate with local law enforcement and establish communication protocols for emergency situations. Agent Foster nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. Your military background gives you expertise that most civilian security professionals don't have. And your familiarity with this specific facility makes you uniquely qualified to develop effective countermeasures. The conversation was interrupted by another knock on the conference room door. This time, Tom Bradley entered without waiting for permission, his expression showing a mixture of curiosity and barely contained excitement about the dramatic developments. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Sorry to interrupt, Tom said, his eyes moving between Sarah and the federal agents with obvious interest. But Margaret asked me to let you know that there are more unmarked cars in the parking lot, and some of the parents are starting to ask questions about why federal agents are here. Agent Foster thanked Tom for the information and asked him to tell Margaret that they would be concluding their initial interview with Sarah shortly. After Tom left, she turned back to Sarah with an expression that suggested the conversation was about to take another significant turn. Ms. Martinez, we need to ask you a direct question, and we need you to be completely honest with us. Are you prepared to work with federal law enforcement to help protect this facility and its users from potential threats related to your military service? The question carried implications that went far beyond Sarah's current job description or comfort level. Agreeing to work with federal agents would mean acknowledging that her presence at the community center had created risks for others. But it would also mean taking responsibility for protecting people who had been questioning her qualifications and dismissing her expertise. Yes, Sarah said without hesitation. These people, my coworkers, the kids in the after-school program, the adults who come here for classes, they don't deserve to be put at risk because of my military service. If my training and experience can help protect them, then I have an obligation to use those skills. Agent Foster exchanged glances with her colleagues, and Sarah could see approval in their expressions. We were hoping you'd say that. Because the next phase of this operation is going to require someone with your background and training to serve as the primary security coordinator for the facility. The role would mean stepping out of the shadows where she had been operating as a dismissed and undervalued employee. It would mean taking visible responsibility for protecting the community center and everyone associated with it, knowing that her coworkers would finally understand that her military credentials were not just legitimate, but essential for their safety. Sarah felt a sense of purpose and validation that she hadn't experienced since leaving active duty. The quiet competence that had been dismissed as pretension was about to become the foundation for protecting innocent people from dangerous criminals, seeking revenge for military operations she had conducted years earlier. The federal agents were about to learn that Sarah Martinez was not just someone with legitimate military credentials, but someone whose specialized training and experience would be crucial for handling security threats that required the highest levels of professional competence and personal courage. Agent Foster closed her folder and leaned back in her chair, studying Sarah with the calculated assessment of someone preparing to reveal information that would fundamentally alter the operational landscape. The conference room had taken on the atmosphere of a military command center, with documents spread across the table and the weight of serious decision-making hanging in the air. Ms. Martinez, before we proceed with the security coordination role, there's additional information about your military service that we need to discuss, Agent Foster said, her tone carrying a gravity that immediately commanded Sarah's full attention. Your final deployment involved more than just the arms trafficking operation we mentioned earlier. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as fragments of classified memories began to surface. The operations during her last 6 months of active duty had been compartmentalized and classified at levels that required special clearances and lifetime non-disclosure agreements. She had assumed that her transition to civilian employment would mean those experiences would remain buried in classified files. Agent Davis opened a new folder, this one marked with security classifications that Sarah recognized from her military service. During Operation Silent Thunder, you were assigned to a joint task force that disrupted a network of international arms dealers who were supplying weapons to domestic terrorist organizations. The intelligence you gathered led to arrests in 6 different countries. The mention of Operation Silent Thunder brought back vivid memories of months spent in deep cover operations, coordinating with intelligence agencies from multiple countries, and gathering evidence that had taken years to develop into prosecutable cases. Sarah had been one of only 12 personnel assigned to the operation, and her role had involved infiltrating criminal networks that operated at the highest levels of international arms trafficking. The individuals we discussed earlier, Volkov and the Kozlov brothers, were actually peripheral players in a much larger network, Agent Thompson explained, spreading photographs and organizational charts across the table. The real targets of the operation were individuals with connections to domestic terrorist groups who were planning attacks on civilian targets throughout the United States. Sarah studied the organizational charts, recognizing some of the names and faces from her classified briefings during the operation. The network had been vast and sophisticated, with cells operating in multiple states and connections to international criminal organizations that supplied weapons, financing, and operational support. The arrests and prosecutions that resulted from Operation Silent Thunder prevented at least 3 major terrorist attacks, Agent Foster continued. Shopping malls, schools, and government buildings were all potential targets. The intelligence you gathered quite literally saved hundreds of lives. The revelation carried emotional weight that Sarah had not expected. During her military service, she had focused on the technical aspects of intelligence gathering and evidence collection, understanding that her work was important, but not fully grasping the scope of the threats that had been prevented through her efforts. However, Agent Davis added, his expression becoming more serious, the success of Operation Silent Thunder also created long-term security risks for everyone who was involved. The criminal networks that were disrupted have spent years rebuilding their operations and identifying the personnel who were responsible for their losses. The implication was clear and deeply concerning. Sarah's employment at the community center had not just attracted the attention of 3 recently released criminals. It had potentially exposed her to revenge operations from a much larger and more dangerous network of individuals with extensive resources and international connections. Are you telling me that the surveillance activities we've been discussing are connected to international terrorist networks rather than just organized crime? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the growing concern she felt for everyone at the facility. Agent Foster nodded grimly. We believe so. The surveillance techniques being used around this facility are too sophisticated for typical criminal operations. They suggest training and resources that are consistent with operations conducted by individuals with military or intelligence backgrounds. The conference room door opened again, and Margaret Chen entered with an expression of barely controlled panic. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation developing in the parking lot. Several parents have arrived to pick up their children, and there are men in suits questioning them about their relationships with our staff members. Agent Foster and her colleagues exchanged glances that suggested this development was both expected and concerning. Sarah felt her military training fully engage as she processed the tactical implications of the situation and the potential risks to the civilian population that was now directly involved. Mrs. Chen, Agent Foster said, rising from her chair, we need you to keep all children and adults inside the building until we can assess the security situation. No one should leave the facility without speaking with us first. Margaret nodded nervously, clearly overwhelmed by the rapidly developing situation. Should I be calling parents to explain what's happening? Some of them are already upset about the men asking questions in the parking lot. Agent Thompson answered before Agent Foster could respond. We'll handle communications with the parents. Right now, we need to focus on ensuring everyone's safety while we determine the scope of the threat. After Margaret left the room, Agent Foster turned back to Sarah with an expression that suggested the conversation was about to take a decisive turn. Ms. Martinez, the situation has escalated beyond what we initially anticipated. We need to implement emergency security protocols immediately. Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that had accompanied high-stakes operations during her military service. The theoretical discussion about potential threats had suddenly become an active security situation requiring immediate tactical responses and strategic planning. What kind of emergency protocols? Sarah asked, her voice taking on the professional tone she had used during military briefings. Are we talking about evacuation procedures, lockdown operations, or something else entirely? Agent Davis consulted his notes before responding. Based on the surveillance patterns and the presence of individuals questioning community members, we believe this facility is about to become the focal point of a direct confrontation. We need to establish defensive positions and communication protocols while coordinating with additional federal resources. The language was familiar from Sarah's military experience, but the context was unprecedented. She had never been responsible for protecting a civilian facility filled with children and community members who had no training or preparation for dealing with security threats at this level. I need to understand the current tactical situation, Sarah said, her mind automatically shifting into operational planning mode. How many potential hostiles are we dealing with? What kind of weapons or equipment might they have? And what are their likely objectives? Agent Foster appreciated Sarah's direct approach to the crisis. We've identified at least 6 individuals conducting surveillance and intelligence gathering activities around the facility. They appear to be armed and equipped with sophisticated communication equipment. Their primary objective appears to be gathering information about your daily routines and the facility's security vulnerabilities. The assessment confirmed Sarah's growing concern about the seriousness of the threat. 6 trained individuals with weapons and communications equipment represented a significant tactical challenge, especially when the primary responsibility was protecting civilians rather than engaging in direct confrontation. However, Agent Thompson added, we also have federal resources positioning around the facility. FBI tactical teams, local law enforcement, and additional intelligence personnel are coordinating to contain the situation and prevent any direct threats to the community members. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and continued concern. Federal resources would provide the tactical advantage needed to handle armed individuals, but the presence of children and community members in the facility created complications that required careful coordination and planning. What's my role in this operation? Sarah asked, recognizing that her military training and familiarity with the facility made her uniquely qualified to contribute to the tactical response. Agent Foster's expression showed both respect and concern as she answered, we need you to serve as the primary liaison between federal tactical teams and the civilian population. Your security expertise will be crucial for implementing protective measures, and your relationship with the community members will be essential for maintaining calm and cooperation. The role would require Sarah to step fully into the leadership position that her military training had prepared her for, while also managing the complex dynamics of a civilian facility under federal protection. Her coworkers who had been questioning her credentials were about to see her military expertise applied to a real-world security crisis. The federal agents were about to learn that Sarah Martinez was not just someone with legitimate military credentials, but someone whose specialized training and experience would be essential for protecting innocent people from individuals who represented genuine threats to national security and public safety. The transformation from dismissed employee to federal security coordinator was about to begin, with stakes that extended far beyond workplace dynamics or personal vindication. The main hallway of the community center had transformed into something resembling a military command post, with federal agents coordinating through encrypted communication devices while Sarah moved between groups of increasingly anxious community members. The after-school program children had been gathered in the main hall under the supervision of staff members who were struggling to maintain normalcy while processing the reality of their situation. Sarah approached the cluster of teenagers who had been playing basketball when the lockdown began. Marcus Williams looked up at her with an expression that mixed confusion with the kind of street-smart awareness that had helped to navigate his neighborhood's various dangers. "Miss Sarah, what's really going on here?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the authority he had developed as an informal leader among his peers. "These aren't regular cops, and everyone's acting like we're in some kind of movie." Sarah knelt down to his eye level, drawing on the communication skills she had learned during community outreach operations in Afghanistan. "Marcus, I need you to help me keep everyone calm while we handle a security situation. There are some people outside who might be trying to cause trouble, but we have professionals here to make sure everyone stays safe." The explanation was carefully crafted to provide enough information to secure cooperation without creating panic among the teenagers. Sarah's military training had taught her that effective leadership in crisis situations required balancing honesty with tactical considerations. "Are you like undercover FBI or something?" asked Keisha Johnson, a 14-year-old who had been attending the after-school program for over a year. "Because you're talking to those agents like you know what you're doing, and they're listening. Do you like you're in charge?" The observation was perceptive and highlighted the transformation that was occurring in real time. Sarah's colleagues and the community members were witnessing her transition from questioned employee to federal security coordinator, and the change was dramatic enough to capture attention from people who had previously dismissed her expertise. "I have military training that's helping me work with the federal agents," Sarah replied, keeping her explanation simple but honest. "Right now, the most important thing is that everyone follows instructions and stays together until we resolve the situation." Across the hall, Tom Bradley was engaged in an animated conversation with Agent Thompson, his expression showing the kind of shock that came from having fundamental assumptions proven wrong. Sarah could hear fragments of their discussion as she moved between groups of community members. "You're telling me that Sarah actually has the kind of military background that would make her a target for terrorists?" Tom asked, his voice carrying disbelief mixed with growing concern. "We thought she was making up stories about her deployments." Agent Thompson's response was patient but firm. "Ms. Martinez's military service involved classified operations that disrupted international criminal networks. The individuals who are currently surveilling this facility are seeking revenge for operations that prevented terrorist attacks on civilian targets." The revelation was spreading through the staff members who had spent months questioning Sarah's credentials and dismissing her security recommendations. Linda Rodriguez stood near the main office, her expression showing the kind of uncomfortable realization that accompanied the recognition of a serious misjudgment. "We've been treating her like she was lying about her background," Linda said to Janet Morrison, her voice barely above a whisper. "Meanwhile, she's been trying to protect us from people who want to hurt her because of classified military operations." Janet nodded, her expression showing sympathy both for Sarah's situation and for the awkward position her colleagues now found themselves in. "I kept thinking there was something different about how she handled security situations. She always seemed to know exactly what to do, even when things got complicated." The conversation was interrupted by Agent Foster, who approached the group with the authoritative presence that had marked her interactions throughout the day. "I need to speak with all staff members about the security protocols we're implementing. Ms. Martinez will be coordinating between federal personnel and facility operations." The announcement formalized Sarah's role in a way that made her authority clear to everyone present. Her coworkers who had been questioning her qualifications were now being told that she would be their primary liaison with federal law enforcement during a genuine security crisis. Margaret Chun joined the group, her expression showing the strain of managing a facility under federal protection. Sarah, the agents are asking about our emergency communication systems and evacuation procedures. I told them that you had submitted recommendations about upgrading our protocols several months ago. The reference to Sarah's security recommendations carried new weight in the current context. The suggestions that had been dismissed as unnecessary or overly complex were now being recognized as prescient analysis of vulnerabilities that had become critically important. Those recommendations are still valid, Sarah said, her voice carrying the professional confidence that had been evident throughout her military service. I'll need to review them with the federal team and adapt them to the current threat level. Agent Davis approached the group with a tactical radio in his hand, his expression showing the focused intensity of someone managing a complex operation. Ms. Martinez, we need you to coordinate with the tactical team's positioning around the facility. Your knowledge of the building layout and daily routines will be essential for establishing effective defensive positions. The request highlighted the unique value of Sarah's combined military training and civilian facility experience. She understood both the tactical considerations that federal agents needed to address and the operational realities of maintaining a community center under emergency conditions. I'll need access to the building's architectural plans and security camera feeds, Sarah said, her mind automatically shifting into operational planning mode. I'll also need to coordinate with staff members to ensure that protective measures don't interfere with essential facility operations. Agent Foster nodded approvingly. We're establishing a command center in the main office. You'll have access to all the resources you need to coordinate security measures and community member safety. As Sarah moved toward the main office, she passed several community members who were beginning to understand the seriousness of their situation. Parents who had arrived to pick up their children were being debriefed by federal agents, and their expressions showed growing concern about the safety of their families and the facility they had trusted with their children's care. Mrs. Angela Rodriguez, whose 10-year-old daughter attended the after-school program, approached Sarah with the kind of direct concern that came from maternal instinct. Sarah, I need to know if my daughter is safe here. These agents are telling me that there are dangerous people watching the building. Sarah's response drew on the communication skills she had developed during military operations that required building trust with civilian populations. Mrs. Rodriguez, your daughter is safer here right now than she would be anywhere else. We have federal agents protecting the facility, and we're implementing security measures that will ensure everyone's safety. The reassurance was delivered with the kind of calm authority that helped manage crisis situations effectively. Sarah's military training had taught her that leadership in emergency situations required projecting confidence while maintaining honesty about the seriousness of the threat. But why are these people targeting our community center? Mrs. Rodriguez asked, her voice showing the confusion that came from having her familiar world suddenly transformed into a potential battleground. Sarah chose her words carefully, providing enough information to justify the protective measures without creating unnecessary panic. Some people are upset about military operations I was involved in several years ago. They're trying to cause trouble for me, but the federal agents are here to make sure that doesn't happen. The explanation satisfied Mrs. Rodriguez's immediate concerns, while highlighting the personal courage that Sarah was demonstrating by remaining at the facility despite the risks to her own safety. Her decision to stay and coordinate security measures rather than accepting federal protection elsewhere showed the kind of commitment to others that had marked her military service. In the main office, Agent Foster was coordinating with federal tactical teams through encrypted communication equipment that had been rapidly deployed to transform the space into an operational command center. Large monitors displayed real-time surveillance feeds from around the facility, showing the positions of both federal agents and the individuals who were conducting surveillance activities. Ms. Martinez, Agent Foster said as Sarah entered the command center, we need your assessment of the facility's defensive capabilities and your recommendations for protecting the civilian population if this situation escalates to direct confrontation. The request represented the culmination of Sarah's transformation from dismissed employee to federal security coordinator. Her military expertise was no longer being questioned or minimized. It was being recognized as essential for protecting innocent people from individuals who represented genuine threats to national security and public safety. Sarah studied the surveillance feeds and tactical displays, her mind processing the information with the systematic approach that had been instilled through years of military training. The community center that had been her workplace for 6 months was about to become the focal point of a federal operation that would validate her credentials in the most dramatic way possible. The tactical displays in the makeshift command center showed a complex operational picture that required immediate decision-making and strategic coordination. Sarah studied the real-time surveillance feeds, her trained eye immediately identifying the positioning patterns and movement behaviors that indicated escalating threat levels. 6 individuals had been confirmed in surveillance positions around the facility, but the tactical teams were reporting additional movement that suggested reinforcements were arriving. Agent Foster, we have a problem, Sarah said, pointing to one of the monitors that showed the facility's rear parking area. The individuals positioned near the back entrance are using military-style communication equipment and coordinated movement patterns. This isn't just criminal surveillance, it's a tactical reconnaissance operation. Agent Foster moved to Sarah's position, studying the screen with the intensity of someone who had seen similar patterns in other high-stakes operations. What are you seeing that concerns you most? Sarah indicated specific movement patterns on the display, drawing on her military training to identify tactical indicators that might not be immediately obvious to civilian law enforcement. They're conducting systematic mapping of sight lines, entry points, and potential defensive positions. The timing of their movements suggests they're preparing for a coordinated assault rather than continued surveillance. The assessment carried implications that fundamentally changed the nature of the federal response. What had begun as a protective operation to prevent intimidation and harassment was evolving into preparation for defending a civilian facility against individuals with apparent military training and sophisticated tactical capabilities. Agent Davis approached with a tactical radio in his hand, his expression showing the focused intensity of someone receiving critical intelligence updates. We're getting reports from federal tactical teams that some of the individuals around the facility are carrying weapons that suggest military backgrounds. We may be dealing with former military personnel who have been recruited by the criminal network. The information confirmed Sarah's growing concern about the sophistication of the threat. Military-trained individuals with access to advanced weapons and communication equipment represented a significant escalation in danger level, requiring response strategies that went beyond typical civilian law enforcement capabilities. What kind of weapons are we talking about? Sarah asked, her mind automatically shifting into threat assessment mode. Are we dealing with small arms or something more sophisticated? Agent Thompson consulted his notes before responding. The tactical teams have identified what appear to be military-grade rifles and communication equipment. We're also seeing evidence of surveillance technology that suggests access to resources beyond typical criminal operations. The escalation was both concerning and clarifying. Sarah's military training had prepared her for situations involving well-equipped adversaries, but the presence of children and community members in the facility created complications that required careful tactical planning and risk management. In the main hall, the after-school program participants were beginning to show signs of stress and confusion as the lockdown extended beyond their normal dismissal time. Sarah knew that maintaining civilian morale and cooperation would be crucial for the success of any defensive operation. especially if the situation continued to escalate. I need to address the community members, Sarah told Agent Foster. They're starting to panic, and that could create additional complications if we have to implement emergency procedures. Agent Foster nodded, recognizing the importance of civilian cooperation during complex tactical operations. Go ahead, but keep your communications general. We don't want to create panic by providing too many details about the threat level. Sarah moved into the main hall, where approximately 60 community members were gathered under the supervision of staff members who were struggling to maintain normal activities while processing the reality of their situation. The teenagers had clustered together near the basketball court, while younger children stayed close to their adult supervisors. Everyone, can I have your attention for a moment? Sarah said, her voice carrying the calm authority that had served her during military operations. I know this situation is confusing and stressful, but I want to update you on what we're doing to ensure everyone's safety. The hall quieted as community members turned their attention to Sarah, many of them seeing her in a leadership role for the first time. Her transformation from questioned employee to federal security coordinator was becoming visible to everyone present. We have federal law enforcement agencies working to resolve a security situation that's related to my military service. Sarah continued, choosing her words carefully to provide reassurance without creating panic. The most important thing right now is that everyone stays calm and follows the instructions from the federal agents and facility staff. Marcus Williams raised his hand with a question that reflected the concerns of many community members. Miss Sarah, how long are we going to be stuck here? My mom's probably worried about me not coming home on time. Sarah's response demonstrated the communication skills she had developed during community outreach operations in military settings. Marcus, the federal agents are contacting families to let them know that everyone is safe. We're working to resolve this situation as quickly as possible, but we need to make sure it's completely safe before anyone leaves the building. The explanation helped maintain cooperation, while acknowledging the legitimate concerns of community members who were being asked to trust federal authorities during a confusing and potentially dangerous situation. Near the main office, Tom Bradley was engaged in conversation with several other staff members, his expression showing the kind of profound shock that came from having fundamental assumptions proven completely wrong. Sarah could hear fragments of their discussion as she moved between groups of community members. I can't believe we spent months questioning her credentials, Tom said, his voice carrying embarrassment mixed with growing respect. She's been trying to protect us this whole time, and we treated her like she was making up stories about her military service. Linda Rodriguez nodded, her expression showing uncomfortable recognition of the misjudgments that had characterized her interactions with Sarah. All those security recommendations she submitted, all the time she tried to explain why certain procedures were important. She was trying to prepare us for exactly this kind of situation. The conversation was interrupted by Agent Thompson, who approached with updated intelligence that would fundamentally change the tactical situation. We need to implement immediate emergency protocols. The surveillance teams around the facility are being reinforced, and we're detecting communication patterns that suggest they're preparing for direct action. The news sent a chill through the staff members who were beginning to understand the seriousness of the threat. What had begun as a confusing disruption to their normal routine was evolving into a genuine security crisis that could potentially involve violence against innocent community members. Sarah returned to the command center, where Agent Foster was coordinating with federal tactical teams through encrypted communication equipment. Large monitors displayed real-time surveillance feeds that showed increasing activity around the facility's perimeter. The situation is escalating faster than we anticipated, Agent Foster told Sarah. We need to implement full defensive protocols immediately. Your knowledge of the facility's layout and operations will be crucial for coordinating protective measures. Sarah studied the tactical displays, her mind processing the information with the systematic approach that had been instilled through years of military training. The community center was about to become the focal point of a federal operation. That would require every aspect of her specialized knowledge and experience. We need to establish secure communication with all facility staff and create evacuation routes that provide maximum protection for community members, Sarah said, her voice taking on the professional tone she had used during military briefings. I'll also need to coordinate with the federal tactical teams to ensure that defensive positions don't interfere with civilian safety measures. Agent Davis approached with tactical equipment that would enable Sarah to communicate directly with federal response teams. Ms. Martinez, you're now the primary liaison between federal tactical operations and civilian facility management. Your military experience makes you uniquely qualified to coordinate both aspects of this operation. The formal recognition of Sarah's role represented the complete vindication of her military credentials and professional competence. Her coworkers who had spent months questioning her background were now witnessing her transition into a federal security coordinator responsible for protecting their lives and the lives of dozens of community members. The tactical radio in Sarah's hand crackled with communications from federal agents positioned around the facility. The professional coordination and strategic planning that had characterized her military service were about to be applied to protecting innocent people from individuals who represented genuine threats to national security and public safety. Outside the facility, unmarked vehicles were arriving with additional federal resources, while the individuals conducting surveillance activities were preparing for what appeared to be a coordinated assault on the community center. Sarah's military training and civilian facility experience were about to become the foundation for a defensive operation that would determine the safety of everyone she had worked to protect. The tactical radio crackled with urgent communications. As Sarah coordinated defensive positions from the command center, her military training fully engaged in managing the most complex security situation she had faced since her deployment operations. The surveillance feeds showed that the individuals around the facility had moved from reconnaissance to what appeared to be final preparation for a coordinated assault. "Command, this is Perimeter Team Alpha," came the voice through Sarah's tactical radio. "We have visual confirmation of at least 8 hostiles now positioned around the target facility. They appear to be equipped with military-grade weapons and are using sophisticated communication equipment to coordinate their movements." Sarah studied the tactical displays while processing the radio communications, her mind automatically calculating fields of fire, evacuation routes, and defensive positions that would provide maximum protection for the 60 community members still inside the facility. The situation had escalated beyond anything she had anticipated when she first accepted the job at the community center. "Perimeter Team Alpha, this is Facility Command," Sarah responded, her voice carrying the calm authority she had developed during military operations. "What's your assessment of their tactical capabilities and likely objectives?" The response came immediately. "Facility Command, these individuals demonstrate military training and coordination. Their positioning suggests they're preparing for a multi-directional assault with the apparent objective of breaching the facility and securing specific targets." Agent Foster approached Sarah's position with additional intelligence that would fundamentally change their defensive strategy. "We've identified the lead individual coordinating the assault. Marcus Volkov is personally directing the operation, which suggests this isn't just a revenge attack. It's a strategic operation designed to capture you alive." The information carried implications that made Sarah's blood run cold. A capture operation meant that the individuals outside were planning to breach the facility, neutralize any resistance, and extract her while potentially using the community members as hostages or bargaining chips. If they're planning a capture operation, They'll need to minimize casualties to avoid triggering a massive federal response, Sarah said, her military training automatically analyzing the tactical implications. But they'll also need to demonstrate their capability to harm innocent people if their demands aren't met. Agent Davis joined the tactical discussion, his expression showing the focused intensity of someone managing a complex hostage situation. We're implementing full federal response protocols. FBI tactical teams, local law enforcement, and specialized federal resources are coordinating to prevent any breach of the facility. The escalation meant that the community center had become the focal point of a major federal operation involving multiple agencies and specialized tactical units. Sarah's employment at the facility had transformed it from a neighborhood community center into a potential battlefield requiring the highest levels of federal security response. In the main hall, the community members were beginning to show signs of serious stress as the lockdown extended well beyond normal facility hours. Parents who had been contacted by federal agents were gathering outside the facility, creating additional complications for the tactical teams trying to establish secure perimeters. Sarah knew that maintaining civilian morale and cooperation would be crucial for the success of any defensive operation, especially if the situation continued to escalate toward direct confrontation. She approached Margaret Chen, who was struggling to coordinate with staff members while processing the reality of their situation. "Margaret, I need to address the community members again," Sarah said, her voice carrying the professional confidence that had marked her military service. "They need to understand that this situation is serious, but that we have the resources and expertise to protect them." Margaret nodded, her expression showing both trust in Sarah's judgment and concern about the implications of the escalating situation. "Sarah, some of the parents outside are demanding to see their children. The federal agents are trying to explain the security situation, but people are getting frustrated and scared." The challenge was typical of complex operations involving civilian populations. Sarah's military training had taught her that managing civilian expectations and cooperation was often as important as tactical considerations in determining the success of protective operations. "I'll coordinate with the federal agents to establish communication protocols with the parents," Sarah said. "We need to provide enough information to secure their cooperation without compromising operational security." Agent Thompson approached with updated tactical intelligence that would require immediate adjustment of defensive strategies. "We're detecting electronic surveillance equipment that suggests the hostiles have detailed intelligence about the facilities layout and security systems. They appear to know our defensive positions and communication protocols." The information was deeply concerning and suggested that the surveillance operation had been more comprehensive than initially realized. The individuals outside had apparently been gathering intelligence about the facility's vulnerabilities and federal response capabilities for an extended period. "How detailed is their intelligence?" Sarah asked, her mind automatically calculating the implications for civilian safety and defensive effectiveness. "They appear to have building schematics, staff schedules, and detailed information about our communication systems," Agent Thompson replied. "This suggests they've been conducting surveillance for weeks or months, not just the recent activities we've documented." The revelation meant that Sarah's employment at the community center had been monitored from the beginning, with hostile individuals gathering intelligence about her daily routines, professional relationships, and the facility's security vulnerabilities. The scope of the surveillance operation suggested resources and planning that went far beyond typical criminal activities. In the main office, Tom Bradley was coordinating with federal agents while processing the dramatic transformation of his understanding about Sarah's background and qualifications. His expression showed the kind of profound shock that came from realizing that fundamental assumptions had been completely wrong. "Agent Foster," Tom said, his voice carrying embarrassment mixed with growing concern, I need to apologize for the way we've been treating Sarah. We had no idea that her military background made her a target for terrorists. Agent Foster's response was professional but pointed. Mr. Bradley, Ms. Martinez's military service involved classified operations that prevented terrorist attacks on civilian targets. The individuals currently threatening this facility are seeking revenge for operations that quite literally saved hundreds of lives. The explanation provided context that made the current situation both more understandable and more frightening. Sarah's coworkers were beginning to comprehend that their dismissive attitudes toward her military credentials had been based on ignorance about the significance and danger of her service. Linda Rodriguez approached the conversation with an expression that showed uncomfortable recognition of the misjudgments that had characterized her interactions with Sarah. We've been questioning her qualifications while she's been trying to protect us from people who want to hurt her because of classified military operations. The acknowledgement represented a fundamental shift in how Sarah's colleagues understood both her professional competence and her personal courage. Her decision to remain at the facility and coordinate security measures rather than accepting federal protection elsewhere demonstrated the kind of commitment to others that had marked her military service. The tactical radio crackled with communications from federal agents positioned around the facility's perimeter. Command, this is Perimeter Team Bravo. We have movement from multiple hostile positions. It appears they're beginning final preparations for coordinated assault on the facility. Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that had accompanied high-stakes operations during her military service. The theoretical discussion about potential threats had become an active, tactical situation requiring immediate response and strategic coordination. All teams, this is Facility Command, Sarah responded, her voice carrying the calm authority that had served her during military operations. Implement defensive protocols immediately. Priority is protection of the civilian population. Hostile capture operation is probable. The communications represented the culmination of Sarah's transformation from dismissed employee to federal security coordinator. Her military expertise was no longer being questioned or minimized, it was being recognized as essential for protecting innocent people from individuals who represented genuine threats to national security and public safety. Agent Foster approached Sarah's position with final tactical intelligence that would determine the federal response strategy. Ms. Martinez, we're implementing extraction protocols for you while maintaining defensive positions for the civilian population. Your safety is crucial for preventing this situation from escalating to a hostage scenario. Sarah's response demonstrated the personal courage and commitment to others that had defined her military service. Agent Foster, I'm not leaving these people. My presence here created this situation, and I'm going to see it through to resolution. These community members trusted me to protect them, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. The decision represented Sarah's complete acceptance of the leadership role that her military training had prepared her for, while also demonstrating the personal integrity that had earned her the respect of the community members who had come to depend on her protection. Outside the facility, federal tactical teams were positioning for what appeared to be an imminent confrontation with individuals who had demonstrated military training and sophisticated tactical capabilities. Sarah's military expertise and civilian facility experience were about to become the foundation for a defensive operation that would determine the safety of everyone she had worked to protect. The tension in the command center reached a critical point as multiple tactical radios crackled simultaneously with reports from federal agents positioned around the facility. Sarah coordinated responses while studying the surveillance feeds that showed hostile individuals moving into final assault positions. The sophisticated coordination and military-style equipment visible in the feeds confirmed that this was far more than a criminal revenge operation. Command, this is Overwatch Alpha, came the urgent voice through Sarah's tactical radio. We have positive identification of Marcus Volkov directing the assault coordination. He's positioned in the northeast sector with what appears to be military-grade communication equipment and is giving tactical instructions to multiple teams. Sarah processed the information while maintaining awareness of the 60 community members who remained inside the facility under federal protection. The presence of children and elderly adults created constraints on tactical responses that required careful coordination between civilian safety and defensive operations. Overwatch Alpha, this is Facility Command, Sarah responded, her voice carrying the calm authority that had served her during the most dangerous military operations. What's your assessment of their timeline for initiating assault operations? The response came immediately. Facility Command, based on their movement patterns and communication activity, we estimate they'll begin coordinated assault within the next 10 minutes. They appear to be waiting for additional personnel to arrive and establish overwatch positions. Agent Foster approached Sarah's position with critical intelligence that would fundamentally alter their defensive strategy. We've intercepted communications indicating that this operation extends beyond revenge against you personally. They're planning to use this facility as a demonstration of their capability to strike at federal personnel and civilians simultaneously. Revelation carried implications that made Sarah's chest tighten with concern. A demonstration operation meant that the individuals outside were planning to create maximum psychological impact through violence against innocent people, transforming the community center into a symbol of vulnerability that would resonate throughout federal law enforcement and intelligence communities. If they're planning a demonstration operation, they'll want to maximize casualties while ensuring news coverage, Sarah said, her military training automatically analyzing the strategic implications. They'll need to breach the facility, control the civilian population, and maintain tactical advantage long enough to make their political statement. Agent Davis joined the tactical discussion with additional intelligence that confirmed Sarah's assessment. We're detecting news media vehicles arriving in the area. Someone has been providing information to reporters about the developing situation, which suggests coordinated information operations alongside the tactical assault. The coordination between tactical operations and media manipulation indicated a level of sophistication that went beyond typical criminal activities. Sarah's military experience had taught her that such operations required extensive planning, resources, and connections that suggested state-level or international support. In the main hall, the community members were showing increasing signs of stress as the lockdown extended into the evening hours. Sarah knew that maintaining civilian morale and cooperation would be crucial for the success of any defensive operation, especially if the situation escalated to direct confrontation with armed individuals. She approached Marcus Williams, who had emerged as an informal leader among the teenagers and was helping to keep the younger children calm during the extended emergency. His street-smart awareness had allowed him to recognize the seriousness of the situation, while maintaining composure that impressed the federal agents. "Marcus, I need your help with something important," Sarah said, her voice carrying the respect she had always shown for his intelligence and leadership potential. "The federal agents are going to implement some additional security measures, and I need you to help keep everyone calm and cooperative." Marcus nodded, his expression showing the kind of mature understanding that had developed through his experiences in a challenging neighborhood. "Miss Sarah, are we in real danger here? Because some of the little kids are getting scared, and the parents outside are getting loud." Sarah's response demonstrated the communication skills she had developed during military operations that required building trust with civilian populations under stress. "Marcus, there are dangerous people outside who want to hurt me because of military operations I was involved in. But we have federal agents and tactical teams here to protect everyone. The most important thing is that everyone stays calm and follows instructions." The explanation provided enough information to justify the protective measures while acknowledging the legitimate concerns of community members who were being asked to trust federal authorities during a potentially life-threatening situation. Tactical radio crackled with urgent communications from perimeter teams. "Command, this is Perimeter Team Charlie. We have movement from multiple hostile positions. They appear to be initiating a final approach to the facility. We're seeing coordinated advancement from the northeast and southwest sectors." Sarah felt her military training fully engaged as she processed the tactical information and coordinated defensive responses. The theoretical discussion about potential threats had become an active combat situation, requiring immediate decision-making and strategic coordination. "All teams, this is Facility Command," Sarah responded, her voice carrying the calm authority that had served her during military operations. "Implement final defensive protocols. Priority is civilian protection. Prepare for coordinated assault from multiple vectors." Agent Foster approached with tactical equipment that would enable Sarah to coordinate directly with federal response teams positioned around the facility. "Ms. Martinez, you're now the primary tactical coordinator for civilian protection during this operation. Your military experience makes you uniquely qualified to balance defensive requirements with civilian safety considerations." The formal recognition of Sarah's role represented the complete vindication of her military credentials and professional competence. Her coworkers, who had spent months questioning her background, were now witnessing her coordinate a federal tactical operation designed to protect their lives and the lives of dozens of community members. Near the main office, Tom Bradley was observing the tactical coordination with an expression that showed profound shock and growing respect. His months of skepticism about Sarah's military background had been replaced by recognition of expertise that was being applied to protect him and his colleagues from genuine threats. "I can't believe we questioned her credentials," Tom said to Linda Rodriguez, his voice carrying embarrassment mixed with gratitude. "She's coordinating with federal agents like she's done this before, and they're treating her like she's in command of the civilian protection operation." Linda nodded, her expression showing uncomfortable recognition of the misjudgments that had characterized her interactions with Sarah. All those security recommendations she submitted, all the time she tried to explain why certain procedures were important, she was preparing us for exactly this kind of situation. The conversation was interrupted by Agent Thompson, who approached with critical intelligence that would determine the federal response strategy. "We're implementing immediate extraction protocols for all civilian personnel. The hostile forces outside have demonstrated military training and sophisticated tactical capabilities that require maximum protective measures." The news meant that the community center was about to become the focal point of a complex evacuation operation involving multiple federal agencies and specialized tactical units. Sarah's knowledge of the facility's layout and operations would be crucial for coordinating protective measures during the evacuation process. "I need to coordinate evacuation routes that provide maximum protection for community members," Sarah said, her mind automatically calculating fields of fire, cover positions, and movement patterns that would minimize exposure to hostile fire during the evacuation process. Agent Foster nodded, recognizing the importance of Sarah's tactical expertise for ensuring civilian safety during the complex operation. "We have armored vehicles positioned to provide protected transport for all community members. Your coordination will be essential for managing the evacuation process safely and efficiently." The tactical radio crackled with communications from federal tactical teams positioned around the facility's perimeter. "Command, this is Tactical Team Alpha. We have visual confirmation of hostile forces in final assault positions. They appear to be armed with military-grade weapons and are using sophisticated communication equipment to coordinate their attack." Sarah studied the tactical displays while processing the radio communications, her mind automatically calculating the defensive requirements for protecting 60 civilian lives during a coordinated assault by military-trained individuals. The situation represented the most complex security challenge she had faced since her deployment operations. "Tactical Team Alpha, this is Facility Command," Sarah responded, her voice carrying the professional confidence that had marked her military service. "Begin evacuation protocols immediately. Priority is civilian protection during movement to secure transport. Maintain defensive positions until all community members are safely evacuated." The communications represented the culmination of Sarah's transformation from dismissed employee to federal security coordinator responsible for protecting innocent people from individuals who represented genuine threats to national security and public safety. Outside the facility, federal tactical teams were implementing the evacuation operation while maintaining defensive positions against individuals who had demonstrated military training and sophisticated tactical capabilities. Sarah's military expertise and civilian facility experience had become the foundation for a protective operation that would determine the safety of everyone she had worked to protect. As the evacuation began, Sarah moved through the facility with quiet confidence, coordinating between federal agents and community members, while ensuring that her months of security planning and relationship building would contribute to the successful protection of dozens of innocent lives. Her military credentials had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible, but her focus remained on the mission that had always defined her service, protecting others regardless of personal cost. 3 hours later, as the last armored vehicle departed with the evacuated community members, Sarah stood in the empty parking lot watching federal agents process the scene. All 8 hostile individuals had been apprehended without a single shot being fired, a testament to the coordinated response that her tactical coordination had helped orchestrate. Agent Foster approached with a folder containing commendation letters from multiple federal agencies. "Ms. Martinez, your coordination saved 60 lives today. The FBI would like to offer you a position with our Tactical Coordination Unit." Sarah smiled, looking back at the community center where she had spent 6 months being questioned and dismissed. "Thank you, Agent Foster, but I think I'll stay here. These people trusted me to protect them, and that's exactly what I plan to keep doing." The next morning, Sarah arrived at the community center to find Tom Bradley waiting in the parking lot with coffee and a sheepish expression. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. We all do. Your military ID was never fake. We were just too ignorant to recognize the real thing." Margaret Chen emerged from the building with a new security proposal that incorporated every recommendation Sarah had ever submitted. "The board wants to promote you to Director of Security and implement all your protocols immediately. They're also funding a complete security upgrade." Marcus Williams ran up with his usual energy, but his expression showed new respect. "Miss Sarah, my mom saw you on the news coordinating with FBI agents. She said you're a real hero." Sarah clipped her military ID to her belt with renewed pride. Sometimes the greatest victories came not from proving others wrong, but from staying true to your mission regardless of recognition. The quiet heroes walk among us every day. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community of everyday heroes. What's your story of perseverance? Drop it in the comments below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.